So we've got Ping's two latest launches, the i240 iron and the iDi driving iron. Now, the claims are better forgiveness with keeping the control and better sound and feel. So those are the claims, but do they match up? So Ping's i240 head, it's a progression on the classic designs they've done in the past, but what's really changed? The answer is not a huge amount. This has been such a successful model for the last 3 or 4 series. You go back to the i200, 210, those models got a huge amount of play on tour. Matt Fitzpatrick won a major using the i200s, Victor Hovland, Tyrrell Hatton, pretty much all of their staffers, bar a couple, played the i210 as a head to give a little bit of forgiveness, but retain those sort of players' characteristics of consistent spin, retain a bit of flight control. i230, the most recent model, retained that, maybe gained a little bit of forgiveness. So Ping as a brand are not one to just revolutionize things and go, right, we're going to go left field on a change here because it's a new model. They take what's worked before and they'll progress it and progress it and progress it. So this is only a fine tune on what we've seen before from Ping. However, there are things that have changed that you're going to see a little bit more consistency in principle from, and certainly from a design standpoint, just getting that weight a little bit more perimeter weighted on the head to give a bit more margin of error. So we're not going to do a massive deep dive on this. There's not a huge amount of tech to deep dive into in terms of what they've done from before, but a bit of an overview, say, right, what does it mean to you, the player? What actually do those changes mean? So one of the things they've done is they've neatened up the shape a little bit. It's a slightly tighter shape, so actually a slightly more compact look. But there is a hair more offset on this head now. Offset is that line, that angle, differentiation between the front of the hosel and the face. So they've gone back to a hair more offset. Certainly visibly it looks that way. The numbers may say the same, but actually the lines, they look a little more offset again. And that's something Ping historically always had. The i2 irons going way back to the 80s and 90s, they were quite offset as a head. So they're retaining some of that look, which quite a lot of players will like. And in principle gives the head a little more time to square up, but it helps you line the toe and the hosel up, which closes the face a touch, so makes it less likely to miss right. So that's what the offset does. Beyond that, bit of a change to the grooves on the face now. So what we can see here, kind of dial in on these, is the grooves are a little wider spaced on this head now, where in the i230 there were more grooves closer together. So one of the things Ping have tried to do by putting the grooves further apart is out of the fairway, get a little bit more spin out of fairway shots. Now, more grooves and closer together is better out of rough. And so in principle, you're optimizing performance out of the rough because there's more space for the grass and the moisture and the dirt and the debris to go into to then get face ball contact. But actually what we tend to see is out of the fairway, slightly wider groove, more distance between them, getting a bit more face tread when there isn't anything in the way, gets you a little bit more spin. So that's what Ping have done with this head, is optimize and prioritize that performance out of the fairway. So a little bit of a change, and that in principle should mean consistency of spin. So a little bit of a change to the face tread there. What they've also done is the head's a little bit wider on the sole, so that width at the bottom there, a little bit more than the i230. They've pushed that mass down the head a little bit, so deepen that mass. And that sets the center of gravity a little bit lower. It's a little bit wider in the toe side, so there's a bit more mass out that front end, which puts the sweet spot slightly more central, but in principle helps a little bit more launch. And this is particularly in the long irons, 3 to 7 iron in particular, they're going for higher launch and a little bit more spin, higher flight. So that height and stopping power. So again, that gives you a marker into what this head design is really about. It's not a distance club, it's about flight and consistency and control into the green. So making that a little bit wider and putting the weight deeper has helped with that. They've also got this little insert in the back, the badge in the back there. That is an injected elastomer insert. So what that does is actually you can press it and it squidges down. It's a soft feeling material. That helps from a sound and a feel point of view, dampens the sound down, softens the feel a little bit because it sounds a bit less clicky and hard. It also removes weight. It's actually a little bit lighter than the previous one. It sits a little bit lower as well. So again, you're pushing that, taking mass out of there and pushing the weight lower in the head. Again, more stability because there's more weight heel and toe because you've removed mass from that section, but it puts the CG a little bit lower. So again, helps with that flight control. And that material just helps. It's called activated elastomer. Exactly what that means, I'm not quite sure, but I will be checking it out. But it helps the sound and the feel of the club head. And the badge in the back, this badge in the back here, sits a little bit closer into the back of the head, but that also affects the sound, but it's 8.5 grams lighter than the last year's model. So again, there's all this weight saving going on, which allows them to place the weight a little bit more accurately around the frame of the head to make the head more stable across the face and really optimize CG location through the set. It gives more flexibility to design the head and the shaping exactly how they want without compromising on where the center of mass sits and therefore forgiveness. Right, well that's a lot of info. Now, I'm gonna have a hit. I'll tell you how it feels. So as you said a moment ago, the tech and the changes are great, but what does it mean when you're actually hitting? So the visuals, the head shape, sat behind the ball, Ping have retained that white groove in the bottom. That's something they've always done, and that can help to seal the loft. So head shape is slightly squarer than the previous model, but actually still quite neat. And they've hidden that offset a little bit. It's a very smooth offset profile, but it's definitely there. But definitely that head shape is a little more squared off. So that contour-inspired shape they talk about. And then to hit with. So one of the things that's instantly noticeable there is very little feel of deflection of the head. In terms of what that relates to, in terms of when you're hitting, it's just going to feel stable, forgiving. Sometimes actually what the brands will try and do is by moving that weight away from the middle, it stops you actually feeling the miss-hit. So that sort of sense of forgiveness is actually the fact that you just don't notice when you miss-hit it, which is the kind of the holy grail for them, in that if you can put a shot on where the sound doesn't change too much, you don't feel the vibration, essentially you don't think you've misstruck it, even if you have. So it kind of covers up any miss-hits to mean the player stays more confident. So something that's really quite noticeable, I noticed it on other products in the past when they've changed and moved that mass a little bit, is to some players it might feel less solid because you've got less guts behind the ball. So the more you spread the weight around, you sometimes lose that sense of solidity to strike, but what you gain is almost like an armchair around the side of it. The mass is sitting either side of the ball, which then stops the head deflecting, and you just don't feel any twisting. So that can make it feel really stable, really forgiving. So you do get a different sound. It's a slightly more hollow note. Now, some of that is that cavity. The more you put a cavity in there, essentially there's more space for the sound to rattle around in the acoustics change, which is why they use the softer materials, the elastomer, to try and make it feel less clicky and hard. So as I said, to some players, you might feel like you lose a bit of feel, but what you gain in that consistency, that's really the balance up. And I think, for a lot of players, why make the game harder than it needs to be? But if you can play a head that looks like a player's arm, which is essentially what this is, that gives you disproportionate amount of forgiveness to looks, that's a really great combination. It's certainly not a harsh, clicky sound. It's exaggerated a bit on indoors like this, where you get a bit of echo. But it is it's a pleasant club to hit. It's not, you feel like you get a bit back off the club head, but equally speaking, it doesn't feel hot. It doesn't feel like the ball's going to get away from you. And one of the things, the big claims is about, with the groove pattern and the extra weight movement, is consistency. And what we're starting to see a few shots in, those three swings are 3 yards apart. The tolerance on spin, looking at the screen there, 32 revs on spin either way. That's tiny. That's really small. I mean, we'd be happy to see 250 revs or less. 30, I would love to say it's down to my skill level, but it certainly isn't. I'm not that accurate. But what I can see from the data here, I'll do a couple more whilst we're chatting, is the launch angle is nice and high. It's kicking it up. I can see where that's hitting the screen. You're getting plenty of launch. Now that one wasn't hit as well. So, right, then we dropped a half a club. Fair, because that wasn't a great strike. Spin rate's dropped a little bit. It was a bit toey, a bit higher up the face, but actually launch angle's still really nice and high. So the head's giving me that elevation flight that for the player this is for is wanting to get that flight and get that control into the green. So even though I dropped a bit of spin, it's still launched high, so you keep some descent angle, that whole you've got land angle people talk about, that's still there. So I'll give this one more. Again, neither of those last two are perfect strikes, so basically same yardage. I've made sure I didn't toe it on that one. So there's about a half a club drop off of a missed strike, dropped a bit of ball speed. But that height and spin for someone looking to retain height, that is a lovely head. So if you're enjoying this product review, check out the one we did on the latest T-Series irons from Titleist. It's in this link here. It's got all the latest products from them. You can check that out, subscribe, like, and enjoy the rest of the content. So also launched now is the Ping iDi, the driving iron that takes over from the i240 from last year. So gone is the adjustable hosel and sleeve. This is back to a glued bonded iron sleeve, hosel in the same way where you just adjust loft and lie as per normal rather than settings like a hybrid. So that streamlines the hosel a little bit, and that was something that a lot of players weren't that keen on, just sort of bulked it out a little bit. So that neater, cleaner, more iron-like hosel is back. Quite a different head though. This is one where Ping have changed quite a lot in this. It's a little bit bigger. They've definitely gone for maximum forgiveness, and it's a bigger frame in terms of visually that sole width is noticeably larger than the crossover. However, generally speaking, the length of the head, the dimensions of the head are slightly, in terms of length and height, are slightly smaller, and they've gone a little bit less offset on this one as well. So very much along the kind of the iron head versus more offset, more hybrid-like from a visual point of view. However, there's quite a bit going on the inside of this one. So one of the things that's a big change is they've actually got what they're calling inner air. So what that is we call it an airbag on the inside of the head. It's something that fills the head out, which affects the sound, supports the face, but weighs as little as possible, and that is the key thing. If you can fill it out, but not with something heavy, then it allows you, like with the irons we just talked about, to place weight in the optimum position throughout the head. So what weighs less than air? Well, not an awful lot. So essentially that's what they've done. It's supporting the face because it's inflated and filled out, but as little weight as possible. So, pretty smart overall. It's a fresh badge on the back. It's a thinner, lighter badge. We can see we've got the I-beam there. So there's a structure. It's a thicker section that gives a little bit of rigidity to that back section, supports the top of the bottom, so stops the head deforming that a little bit more as well, but again, making it as thin and light as possible. And we've got quite a cambered sole. So actually within the frame, it's almost it's a cast frame more like a metal would in terms of principle. So you've got that thinner, lighter sole, a little bit of mass on the bottom. But by going casting, it makes it a little bit harder. Does change the sound a little bit. So again, makes those acoustics, the inner air, to dampen those acoustics down and that badge on the back more important. But again, it's about strengthening certain areas without adding weight. And there is a maraged steel face, a kind of carpenter steel maraged face, which is thinner, lighter, but stronger, so it allows to get a little bit more speed. So these heads are really designed around getting it out there. Stronger flight, maybe a little bit lower spin. It's certainly mass down the bottom, so you get a bit of launch, but a stronger spin for that punchier, stronger ball flight. So all those characteristics within the head there go together to give you forgiveness, strength, stability, and a hot ball flight. So, as with the i240 iron, let's give it a hit and actually tell you what it actually does from a performance point of view and what it means to the player. So one of the things they've done, we've got three heads. There's a 2, a 3, and a 4, which are 17, 20, and 23 degrees in loft. And they have been designed a little differently each head to get a slightly different flight. So the 2 is designed to come out proportionally a little flatter and lower, and then the 3, relative to loft, it's designed just to launch and spin a hair more, and then the 4 is designed to kick it up in the air more and flight it and spin it a little bit more, because if you're using the 4, it's generally because you're wanting extra flight over the proportionate iron, and if you're using the 2, then you're looking for it to bomb. So they have developed the flight. So it's not just the loft changing, they are designed to spin a bit less as loft goes down and launch a little bit more as loft goes up proportionally to that. So head-wise, you can really see that wider sole when you put it down. The back of the head is visible. That's something that I think we've come to accept or get used to with the driving irons now, because there's no other way of getting the depth and forgiveness. But it's not an unpleasant look. The head shape actually matches the i240 quite well in terms of the overall proportions, although it sits a little bit shallower. But I think for me it's a more natural look as a driving iron than the previous crossover being black as well. I think that for a lot of players just jarred a little bit. However, it was very popular with some. But I think in the main, I think the chrome head's going to be a better look. And then to hit with, so I've gone the 3 iron here. Like any head of this sort of scale, you're going to have a sort of a little bit of hollowness to it. It's going to create a little bit of a note, a bit of clickiness. That's inevitable. The moment you remove mass from the middle, spread it out, and then enclose it, so that sound rattles around inside a little bit more, you get that little bit more of a clicky note off the face. So that one not hit particularly well. Didn't feel loads of twist, but yeah, I think, well, that hit, not great. I'm going to do one more just to give a more representative feel, but it doesn't look or feel hard to hit. And as a 3 iron head, yeah, that was hit a bit better. You can hear there's that little bit more of a pop and a snap off the face. A smash of 147 on a 20-degree head, that's pretty strong. Spin-wise, relatively moderate, but we know that the 2's designed to take that down a bit more. Launch, relatively strong. This isn't a head in the 3 that you're going to see kicking it massively up in the air. That's not what this head's designed to do. But ball speed proportionally very good. I think it's definitely, relative to some of the other driving irons, so they've gone for maximum forgiveness, whereas you take Titleist new heads, there are 2. You've got the 505, which is more equivalent to this, and the 250, which actually feels relatively now to these heads less forgiving. So there's plenty of forgiveness on this, and you kind of give up that little bit of feedback off the face. But what you gain, you're not hitting this club because you're trying to kind of nurdle one in there. You're just trying to get it out there, and you want that extra margin of error. So if I catch it a little bit more out the toe, ball speed efficiency is a little bit lower, but I've only lost 7 yards of carry over the previous swing. So yes, the ball speed's down, but it didn't feel like the head almost twisted out of the grip almost twisted in my hands. It felt like it stayed with me pretty well, hence that didn't jag open and drift out right. But the spin has dropped a little bit, so we've kept some of that yardage. So that's one of the key things, that weight separation, the thinner face, the lighter back, the inner air in the middle, is that weight's around the outside that kind of keeps the head with you at impact and loses as little as possible. I think ultimately, from a ball speed point of view, this is going to be pretty good. I think it's going to be a question of the looks and the sound. Some are going to really like, some aren't. But I think as a progression on the crossover, this is a much more user-friendly club. Quite a strong performance. If I get after one a little bit, just to see, right, how strong can we get this going? Let's see. Yeah, that was hit well. So, ball speed, we've gained 10 miles an hour over the previous one. It was a stronger swing. 147 efficiency. That's pretty good for a 20-degree head. But 13 launch, nice and moderate. 3,500 revs on spin, again, nice and moderate. It's not an exaggerated ball flight, but that for a 94 mile an hour swing, 220 carries pretty good. But does feel very easy. So I think in that respect, they've done a very good job with that. The forgiveness element's great, much more neutral looking than the previous model. I think a more natural progression off the irons. So definitely versus previous crossover, I think what you're going to find is this is a much more natural transition from their irons into the driving iron than the i crossover before it. And in that instance, I think much more popular overall for them and going to do pretty well. So you posed the question at the beginning, do Ping's claims stack up? Do they really match up to what they achieve? So the claim with the 240 was better forgiveness with keeping the control. And I would say absolutely. I think what they have done really well, that control element, from the first few hits I had, there was such a minimal window on spin that actually that consistency of distance and flight, a little bit more trajectory as well, I think was really quite impressive. And yes, I think it is a little bit more stable. The 230 was good for consistency, but I think the stability is up that little bit. Potentially just lost maybe a little bit of feel. That would be the only counterpoint that some players might not enjoy as much, as you lose a bit of stability or rather the feeling of guts behind the contact. But the gain is a bit of forgiveness, and absolutely they've kept the control. So that'll do really well. Driving iron, improved sound and feel. That was really the kind of that's the big moniker that they're chucking out there for this head. Strong off the face, yes. Improved sound, yeah, the i crossover was a pretty harsh note, and this one, even given all the hollowness to it, that inner air, that, you know, the cast frame, the maraged face, all of those things that to me from a tech point of view say that's going to sound clicky, I think they've kept that in check pretty well. There isn't a head out there with this construction that doesn't feel clicky, but I think sound-wise they've done a good job to keep a lid on that to the extent they have. And from a feel point of view, again, very stable. I think really that's what I think in the driving iron, the feel is linked to sound, but actually the actual sensation to hit with feels like there's a lot of face to get away with, and ultimately that's what you're using this club for. So, you know, Ping, engineers by trade, they've always gone on function versus form and wanted to get tangible results out of it rather than just marketing claims. The marketing claims and the results, I think, do stack up. I think there's probably a bigger change on the 240 in terms of what they've achieved relative to claim. But having said that, I think the way that the driving iron transitions off the irons is much, much neater. And as a result, going to be very successful as well. But the 240, as with its predecessors, great club, great design. Well done, Ping. That's going to be a very, very popular club. And I think they've done a good job of it.